Ni hao, annyeong! Hello, I'm the Dark Fae and welcome back to The Right Way. It's been a while since I have filmed. I was at my parents' for the holidays and then I was taking some personal time. But yeah, I'm back. Hope you guys are all doing well and let's get into it. So the last time I talked about creating your main character. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link up. I believe it's this direction. So you can go watch it there. But for this episode, I guess we're going to be talking about storyboarding. And I wanted to remind everyone that there are a lot of creative processes out there, so the way that you come up with a story or a world might be different than mine. So don't take anything that I say as like a set way, like it has to be this way. Not at all. This is just to kind of help you get ideas for your own stories or kind of methods to come up with ideas if you're stuck, and also to kind of show you what I kind of do. And I found it's difficult to describe your process to someone, so I'm kind of trying to break this down into steps that make sense. Like, I don't necessarily follow these in the order that I give them. It kind of depends on the story and what kind of pops into my head, but today is all about storyboarding. So going back to the basics from high school English classes, kind of the basics of a story or a plot are kind of the beginning exposition leading up to kind of the climax or the most intense point of the story, and then followed by your denouement, your resolution. What happens with me generally is because I do have my main character by now, and I kind of have an idea of the story that I want, or at least the themes. What kind of ends up happening is I kind of start at the ends and then work my way into the middle. So because I feel like the beginning and the end are the easiest for me, because those are the most clear cut in a way. So I'll have the beginning. Usually I like to start with something that will give you a sense of what the world will be like. I try to either make it a very interesting action scene, or if it's not an action kind of story, something very interesting related to what the character does or what they're about, or if there's a system of magic or something, I'll try to showcase that to really help any readers be more engaged in the world and the story right off the bat. I don't like to start with something that is kind of very wordy or very explanatory, if that makes sense, because in your exposition you don't want to, even though the point of an exposition is to kind of set up the world and your character and give your readers a lot of this information, you don't want to do it in a way that's just bombarding them with lots of information that they have to themselves kind of dissect and read through over and over again. You don't want it to be heavy, and you don't want it to be too wordy. Like they always say, you want to show them, you don't want to tell them. So the beginning, I generally try and come up with something that's kind of exciting, or kind of sets up the story in a good way. And then the ending, I think I come up with the endings first, because I usually have an idea of what I want the story to turn into. And it's kind of how I get there that's the more difficult part for me. So I'll have that that beginning idea, and then the ending. And the ending can involve a lot of things. For storyboarding, it's definitely not anything super detailed, super in-depth. You absolutely know everything that's gonna happen, and what the themes are and what the characters are doing and all that. It's honestly just mostly bullet points, maybe some rough sketches. And maybe you can add in a little bit of detail to kind of help roll it along. But I usually, will do the endings either first or second, switch with the beginning, and I generally have that fleshed out a little bit better. Like, I kind of skip the storyboarding step for the ending because I kind of know what it is. But for your ending or your resolution, it's important to kind of consider not only what is happening, but kind of like where your character ends up, like development-wise. So you could have a story, like bullet points for where, like the location, a very like brief overview of like what happens like in the world, what happens to your character, and then like kind of compare that to the beginning and like see how they're different, if that makes sense. Because hopefully in a good story, your character doesn't stay the same. They're going to develop, they're going to learn, they're going to grow. And I think it can be helpful to kind of maybe like bullet point things at the beginning of what your character is like, and then at the end kind of bullet point what your character is like and then compare how different they are. So you've got kind of your beginning idea, and then you've got your ending idea, and now how do you get from point A to point B? There are kind of like plot templates out there. You don't necessarily have to follow them, but they can be good starting points. So generally kind of in a story, you'll have like 3 to 4 kind of conflicts. One of those will probably be like the lowest point for the character, where they'll have their like descent into darkness, I think is what it's not a trope, is it a trope? What it's called. And then usually they have like some way to get out of that, like a mentor or some kind of outside force helps them, or maybe they figure it out themselves and then they kind of are able to rise up again into your climax or your most intense moment, sort of. And then after that happens, things kind of start to wind down into your resolution, into your ending. That's roughly kind of a good place to kind of start. So to storyboard, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You could kind of follow this like template and see like where you like to add things, where you like to take away things. So come up with kind of your beginning bullet point, and then like put in 3 or 4 bullet points that are kind of like the middle of the story, kind of like how your character sets out on their journey, how they, like if they're traveling anywhere, if like who they meet along the way, and how these things are kind of important, or how they kind of drive their journey along. And then you could put maybe a bullet point for whatever their like descent is, like something that they find more difficult than they expected, something that like really gets them into a dark spot where it doesn't seem like that they could maybe recover. It could be anything like they have a bad encounter with their nemesis and they barely make it out with their lives, or maybe they discover something terrible about like a conspiracy or something about their family that was a lie this whole time. Something like that, where they have an emotional or even physical or mental kind of low point, and then could put more bullet points for like who they meet along the way, and what kind of gets them out of this funk. And then for your highest point, your climax of the story, this should kind of be like what everything is building up to. It's almost kind of like it's like a second ending to your story, if that makes sense. You don't want to end the story right at the end of the climax, because then it'll be it leaves a lot of questions to be answered. But this is kind of like what all of the story is leading up to. It could be the epic battle, the epic showdown. It could be like where your character like finally realizes their own power, or realizes their role in the world and then something spectacular happens. But this should be, kind of what everything leads up to, and then the what causes your ending, basically. So like all the bullet points that you wrote down for the ending, like how your character changed, where it's at, the climax is kind of what drives those things. And then, so when making your actual storyboard, I find that it's really helpful to actually write it out on paper. And you could do kind of any sort of style or method you want, really. I tend to just make little bullet points and lists if I'm particularly stuck. I might kind of go back and read what I've already written or read like other books to try and get ideas, but I generally like to do bullet points. You could even like do little like comic sketches, like storyboards do for movie scenes. You could make little like sticky notes and write down things and so that way you can like kind of stick them, rearrange them, move things that you don't like. And of course, like these bullet points or these little like story points, they can be as detailed or as basic as you want. It's really just something to help you as a guide to kind of follow along. It could be as easy as your character arrives in town and meets with this person, or it could be like your character makes it to this city and then you have bullet points about the city, and then meets this person and you have bullet points about what this person is and what their interactions are, etc. So it's really just a tool for you to kind of map out your story and be able to put things into place, so that way you can avoid like plot holes and you can avoid like making things too complicated or too simple, and like having everything very cohesive. So I think it's a good tool to do. It's a good exercise kind of to do before I think you even start writing, because it can be very difficult, I find, to just try and write a story from the beginning to the end, which is something I do quite often. So I find this is also really helpful if I'm ever stuck and I haven't fully thought of a story, and say like it helps me to kind of block out my story elements to kind of figure out how to transition from one to the next. So that way you have less writer's block and you can have more time writing. So that was kind of a lot in a short amount of time. But that is basically storyboarding. It's a lot of brainstorming, and definitely don't be afraid to like toss away some of your ideas. I feel like as a writer, that's the hardest part. Much harder when you've actually already written it, but it's kind of to throw or file away ideas for later or for other stories, or throw them away completely, because it's something that you've spent time on, you've kind of thought through, and you think, oh, it could work. But sometimes it's just not meant to be. So definitely don't think that like once you've storyboarded something or made a storyboard that you have to stick to it. Sometimes things come up during writing and they lead you in completely different directions, and that's totally okay. That's what writing and the journey is all about. So I guess I'll leave you for the exercise of this video. So you have, what was it, last time was creating your main character and stuff like that, and now I guess it would be to storyboard the idea that you've picked. So I'd say come up with a couple bullet points at least for your beginning, maybe like 2 to 4 conflicts, your climax, and then a couple for your resolution and ending. And you're well on your way to writing your story. And if you are following along with the series, I'd love if you comment down below on what your story is about and what you do for storyboarding or story like writer's block ideas. But thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.